My biological parents threw me away like garbage. Years later, they showed up demanding the money my adoptive parents left me. I was 7 years old when my biological parents decided 3 kids were too expensive and left me on a park bench like a bag of groceries they forgot to return. They told me to wait right there, that they'd be back in 10 minutes. I believed them. I sat on that bench with my legs dangling, too short to touch the ground, watching families walk by with their ice cream cones and their intact lives. I waited through the sunset, through the streetlights coming on, through the park emptying out until it was just me and the darkness and the growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. A police officer found me at 9:47 at night. I remember the exact time because he kept saying it into his radio. Found a minor, female, approximately 7 years old, 9:47 p.m. I was shivering even though it was June. Shock probably, though I didn't know that word back then. I was still clutching the stuffed rabbit my mother had shoved into my hands before walking away. "Be good," she'd said. Those were her last words to me. Be good. Like I'd done something wrong. Like I needed to earn the right to have parents who didn't abandon me. That rabbit was the only thing they ever gave me that I kept. I still have it, actually. It sits on a shelf in my bedroom, a reminder of the worst day of my life, and somehow also the day that eventually led me to the best people I'd ever know. The state placed me in emergency foster care that same night. I remember the social worker, a tired woman named Rita, with kind eyes and too much paperwork. She kept asking if I knew my address, my parents' phone number, anything that could help them find my family. I knew everything. I rattled off our apartment number, the cross streets, my father's work schedule, my mother's favorite grocery store. I gave her my older brother's school name and my baby sister's birth date. I told her everything I could think of because I was convinced this was all a misunderstanding, that once they found my parents, everything would go back to normal. Rita's face did something complicated when she realized my parents hadn't lost me. They'd thrown me away on purpose. She tried to hide it, the pity and the anger, but I saw it anyway. Even at 7, I understood what that look meant. I wasn't a lost child. I was an abandoned one. There's a difference. A couple named Margaret and William took me in 3 weeks later. I was their 4th placement interview. They'd been fostering for 6 months, hoping to adopt, but none of the previous matches had worked out. When they walked into the foster agency's meeting room, I was sitting in a chair that was too big for me, wearing clothes from the donation bin, trying very hard not to cry because crying made people uncomfortable. Margaret sat down across from me and didn't do the thing most adults did, that fake cheerful voice like they were talking to a puppy. She just said, "Hi, I'm Margaret. That's William. We'd really like to get to know you, if that's okay." I asked if they were going to send me back. Everyone sent kids back eventually. That's what the other kids in the temporary home had told me. You stay until they decide you're too much work. Then you go back and wait for someone else. William's eyes got wet. He cleared his throat and said, "We're not looking for easy. We're looking for you." They owned a small chain of traditional American restaurants, the kind with checkered tablecloths and recipes that had been in William's family for 3 generations. Margaret had been a teacher before she married William and started helping him run the business. They'd tried for years to have children and couldn't. When they saw my file, Margaret told me later, she knew immediately I was supposed to be theirs. She said it was like recognizing someone you'd been waiting for your whole life. They fostered me for 6 months while the state tried to locate my biological parents. 6 months of careful steps and tentative trust. Margaret packed my lunches with little notes inside. I still remember the first one. "I hope you have a wonderful day. You deserve wonderful days." William taught me how to crack eggs properly and let me help him test recipes. They never made promises they couldn't keep. They never said everything would be okay when they didn't know if it would be. They just showed up, every single day, consistent and present and real. My biological parents never responded to a single letter, never showed up to a single hearing. The state sent certified mail to their last known address, called every phone number on file, even contacted extended family members who all claimed they didn't know where my parents were and didn't seem particularly interested in helping find them. Eventually, the judge terminated their parental rights for abandonment and neglect. When Margaret and William got the call that they could proceed with adoption, Margaret cried so hard she could barely sign the papers. I called them Mom and Dad within the first year. It felt natural. They loved me like I'd been born to them, never once treating me like I was second choice or damaged goods. They never said things like, "You're so lucky we found you," or "You should be grateful." They acted like they were the lucky ones. Like I was the gift, not them. Dad taught me how to make his grandmother's pot roast when I was 9. He said every good cook needed to understand the foundation recipes. the ones that had fed families for generations. We'd stand in the restaurant kitchen on Sunday mornings, just the two of us, and he'd show me how to season the meat, how to know when the vegetables were ready, how patience was the secret ingredient most people forgot. Cooking is about care, he'd say. Anyone can follow a recipe, but making food that matters, that takes heart. Mom let me reorganize the restaurant supply closet when I was 10 because I liked things neat and orderly. Probably some control thing left over from having my entire life upended. But whatever. She understood without making me explain it. She'd sit with me while I categorized and labeled and made everything make sense. Order isn't just about being neat, she told me once. It's about creating a space where you can breathe. She got it. She got me. By the time I was 12, I could work the register and make change faster than most of the adult employees. By 15, I was helping with inventory and catching discrepancies the bookkeeper missed. By 20, I was managing the books for 2 locations, and Dad was calling me his secret weapon. They never pushed me into the business, never made me feel like I owed them labor for the love they'd given me. But I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand every aspect of what they'd built, because it felt like belonging to something real and permanent. They had 7 restaurants by the time I turned 29. Nothing fancy, just good food and fair prices in working-class neighborhoods where people came in after long shifts and needed something warm and filling. The original location was in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but Dad refused to close it. These are the people who supported us when we were starting out, he'd say. We don't abandon our community just because the demographics changed. That was who they were. Loyal, consistent, real. The business was worth $4.2 million according to the last appraisal, and I knew every detail of how it worked because they'd spent 22 years teaching me. They never hid anything from me. The restaurants would be mine someday, they said. I was their daughter, their only child, the person they trusted most in the world. We'd have dinner together every Sunday at the house, and we'd talk about expansion plans and menu changes and employee benefits. We'd argue sometimes about whether to modernize the ordering system. I wanted to. Dad was skeptical. But it was always respectful, always with the understanding that we were building something together. I thought we had years left, decades. I thought I'd have time to learn everything, to absorb all the wisdom they had to offer, to eventually take over while they retired and traveled and finally relaxed after a lifetime of work. Then a drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon and killed them both instantly. The police came to the main restaurant to tell me. I was in the office doing payroll, completely absorbed in spreadsheets and direct deposit forms, when 2 officers appeared in the doorway looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Are you Cassidy?" one of them asked, and I knew immediately. Before they said another word, I knew. Your body knows before your brain catches up. Your body knows when the worst thing possible has happened. They were driving home from visiting a food supplier upstate. Some guy, 3 times over the legal alcohol limit at 2 in the afternoon, blew through a red light going 60 in a 35 zone. T-boned their car on the driver's side. The police said they died on impact, didn't suffer, like that was supposed to make it better. Like the speed of their death was somehow a consolation prize. I'd never felt pain like that. Not when my biological parents abandoned me. Not ever. This was the kind of grief that makes you understand why people say their heart is broken, because mine felt shattered into 1,000 pieces that would never fit back together right. I couldn't eat for 3 days. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop replaying the last conversation I'd had with them. Something mundane about updating the menu boards. Nothing significant, nothing that worked as a goodbye. The funeral was huge. Employees from all 7 locations came, some of them crying harder than I was. Regulars I'd known my entire childhood showed up. People who'd watched me grow up in those restaurants. The line to view the casket stretched out the funeral home door and down the block. My parents had been good people, the kind who gave employees advances when their kids needed medicine, who donated meals to the elementary school down the street every Thanksgiving, who remembered everyone's birthday and showed up when people needed them. I stood there accepting condolences for 3 hours and felt like I was underwater. People kept saying things like they're in a better place and at least they went together and they'd want you to be strong. All of it was meaningless noise. There was no better place than here with me. Going together didn't make it less devastating. And I didn't want to be strong. I wanted my parents back. The will was straightforward. Everything came to me. The restaurants, the house, their savings, all of it. I was the sole beneficiary because I was their daughter, and they'd never considered any other option. My attorney, a kind older man named Mr. Patterson, who'd handled my adoption paperwork years ago, walked me through everything. He kept saying how sorry he was, how proud my parents would be of how strong I was being. I wasn't strong. I was just numb, going through motions because the alternative was collapsing completely and there were 7 restaurants full of people depending on me to keep things running. 3 months after the funeral, I got a certified letter from an attorney I'd never heard of. My biological parents were suing me for $2 million. I actually laughed when I first read it. Not a funny laugh, more like a hysterical, what the hell is happening laugh. They were claiming they'd never legally surrendered their parental rights. They had, I'd seen the documents. They were demanding compensation for emotional suffering caused by our separation, the separation they caused by abandoning me. They wanted half of everything my real parents had left me because, and I'm quoting here, blood family rights supersede adoptive arrangements in cases of significant inheritance. The lawsuit was 37 pages of legal fiction. They claimed they'd spent decades searching for me, that they'd been young and scared when they left me at the park, that it was a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by financial stress, that they'd tried to get me back but the system had blocked them, that losing me had destroyed their lives and caused ongoing trauma that deserved compensation. All lies. Every single word. Mr. Patterson was furious when he read it. He said we'd fight it, that we'd win easily because the case was absurd. But I knew something he didn't. I knew exactly what kind of people my biological parents were, because my mom and dad had known too. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. My biological parents showed up looking like they'd dressed for a job interview at a mid-range insurance company. My biological father wore a cheap suit that didn't fit right. My biological mother had clearly been crying before she arrived, her eyes red and puffy in a way that might have seemed genuine if I didn't know better. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with their lawyer, a young guy who kept adjusting his tie nervously. When they saw me, my biological mother's face crumpled. She started crying again, reaching toward me like she wanted to hug me. I stared at her with zero expression until she dropped her hand. My biological father looked older than I'd imagined, worn down and tired. Good. I hoped they'd had a miserable 22 years. Their lawyer went first. He painted a picture of young parents overwhelmed by poverty, who made a terrible mistake in a moment of desperation. He showed financial records from 1993 proving they'd been evicted twice that year. He submitted medical records showing my biological mother had been treated for depression. He even had character witnesses, neighbors who testified that my biological parents had seemed devastated after I disappeared. Disappeared. Like I'd vanished into thin air instead of being deliberately abandoned. The whole time, I sat perfectly still with a large envelope in my lap. I'd spent the entire 3 months since receiving their lawsuit doing research. Not legal research, that was Mr. Patterson's job. Personal research. The kind that revealed who people really were. When my parents adopted me, they'd hired a private investigator. Not because they didn't want me, but because they needed to understand what kind of people would abandon a 7-year-old child in a public park. The investigator's report had been in their personal files, locked in the safe at the house I'd inherited. I'd found it 2 weeks after the funeral when I was going through their important documents. That report was 43 pages long and contained information my biological parents clearly had no idea existed. When it was my turn to respond, I stood up and asked the judge if I could present additional evidence. Mr. Patterson looked confused. He didn't know what I had. The judge allowed it. I walked to the front of the courtroom and handed copies to the judge, the court reporter, and my biological parents' lawyer. Then I started talking. In 1987, 8 years before they abandoned me, my biological parents had abandoned another child, a 5-year-old girl. They'd left her alone in a supermarket in a town called Harrisburg, about 200 miles from where we'd lived. The little girl was found 3 hours later in the parking lot, crying and calling for her mommy. My biological parents never came back for her. She went into the foster system just like I eventually would. The courtroom went completely silent. I could hear every breath, every shift in the chairs. My biological mother's face turned white. My biological father started shaking his head, but he didn't say anything. Their lawyer looked like he'd been punched. I kept talking. I had police reports from Harrisburg dated August 12, 1987. I had child services documentation with my biological parents' names, address, and social security numbers listed as the legal guardians who'd surrendered custody by abandonment. I had foster care records showing the little girl, whose name I deliberately didn't say she deserved her privacy, entering the system with a clear notation. Parents failed to retrieve minor after 3 hours, stated did not wish to continue custody. The investigator my parents had hired was thorough. He'd interviewed the social worker who'd handled the case. He'd gotten copies of police statements from witnesses who saw a couple matching my biological parents' description, drive away from the supermarket parking lot with 2 children in the back seat, but leave without the third. He documented everything. The pattern was obvious once you saw it laid out. My biological parents had 3 children. The oldest, my brother, the middle, my abandoned sister, and the youngest, me. When money got tight in '87, they eliminated the middle child. Then they had another baby to replace her. When 3 children became too expensive again in '93, they eliminated the youngest, me. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't a single mistake made in a moment of poverty-induced panic. It was a pattern, a system, a deliberate choice they'd made twice to solve their financial problems by discarding their children like broken appliances. But I wasn't finished. 2 months before this hearing, my biological parents' lawyer had been careless. He'd left his office window open during a phone consultation with his clients. A paralegal in the adjacent building had overheard the entire conversation and, recognizing some of the details from news coverage of the case, had recorded it. She'd sent the recording to Mr. Patterson anonymously. I played it for the court. My biological father's voice came through clearly. If the money doesn't work, we can push for visitation rights. Use that as leverage. My biological mother responded, I don't actually want to see her. I just want access to what she inherited. They laughed about how the adoptive parents did all the hard work raising her, and now they got to collect the payoff. The judge's face went from neutral to absolutely furious. He called an immediate recess and disappeared into his chambers with all the evidence I'd presented. My biological parents' lawyer tried to approach me during the recess. I told him if he came within 10 feet of me, I'd file harassment charges. Mr. Patterson, who'd been completely silent during my entire presentation, put his hand on my shoulder and said, Your parents would be so proud of you right now. I'd been holding myself together through sheer force of will, but that almost broke me. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 5 minutes, then washed my face and went back to the courtroom with my armor fully restored. When the judge returned, he didn't waste time. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. My biological parents were ordered to pay all court costs, including my attorney fees. Then the judge issued a 10-year restraining order. If they came within 500 feet of me or any property I owned, they'd be arrested immediately. The judge also said something I'll never forget. He looked directly at my biological parents and said, You have demonstrated a pattern of abandoning your children when they become inconvenient, then attempting to exploit them when they become valuable. This court finds your actions reprehensible and your lawsuit frivolous. You are fortunate that criminal charges are not being pursued at this time. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in 3 months. On the courthouse steps, a woman approached me. She was maybe 35, thin, with nervous energy that reminded me of a bird ready to fly away at any moment. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of outfit someone puts together from thrift stores when they're trying to look presentable. She had my biological mother's eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. Excuse me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you Cassidy? I turned to look at her fully. Yes. She paused, swallowed hard. I saw the news coverage of your case, and I recognized the names. Your biological parents. They're my biological parents too. I'm the one they left at the supermarket. The world tilted slightly. Mr. Patterson put his hand on my elbow, steadying me. Do you want to talk somewhere private? He asked. I looked at this woman, this stranger who was somehow my sister, and nodded. Yes. We went to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, one of those generic chains with uncomfortable chairs and overpriced drinks. I bought us both coffee. She tried to pay, fumbling with a worn wallet, but I waved her off. We sat in a corner booth, as far from other customers as possible. I didn't know if I should approach you, she said, still not making full eye contact. I know this must be weird. When I saw the news about the lawsuit, about the investigator's report, I thought maybe you'd want to know, that you weren't the only one. Tell me what happened to you, I said. After they left you. She stirred sugar into her coffee without drinking it, the spoon making endless circles. I was 5. We were at this big supermarket, one of those warehouse places. My mom told me to stay in the cereal aisle while she went to get something. I waited and waited. Eventually, a store employee found me crying. They called the police. The police tried to call my parents. No answer. They went to our apartment. We'd already moved out. No forwarding address. How long were you in foster care? I asked. 13 years, until I aged out at 18. She finally looked up at me. I went through 12 different homes. Some were okay, some weren't. Nobody ever wanted to adopt the older kids, especially the ones who came with baggage. And I had a lot of baggage. I felt something crack open in my chest. Guilt, maybe. Or survivor's guilt. Or just overwhelming sadness for this person who'd drawn the same terrible card I had, but never gotten the luck of Margaret and William. What happened when you aged out? I asked. I got a job at a fast food place. Shared a studio apartment with 2 other girls who'd also aged out. We were all just trying to survive, you know? None of us knew how to do taxes or open a bank account or any of the normal stuff parents teach you. We figured it out, but it was hard. She paused. One of my roommates got pregnant at 19. The other one got into drugs. I was the lucky one, I guess, because I just stayed poor and anxious instead of poor and destroyed. I'm so sorry, I said. It's not your fault, she said quickly. I didn't come here to make you feel guilty. I just wanted you to know you're not alone. That whatever you're feeling about them, about what they did, you're not the only one dealing with it. What are you feeling? I asked. About them, I mean. After all these years. She considered this for a long moment. Angry, mostly. Not the hot kind of anger, just this cold understanding that they made choices that broke me in ways I'm still trying to fix. I've been in therapy for 6 years and I still flinch when people raise their voices. I still have nightmares about being left places. I still assume every relationship will end with someone walking away. Me too, I admitted. Even with parents who loved me unconditionally, I still have this fear in the back of my mind that I'm one mistake away from being abandoned again. Does it get better? She asked. Some days, I said honestly, but I don't know if it ever fully goes away. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. It's not your fault, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know you're not alone, that whatever you're feeling about them, about what they did, you're not the only one dealing with it. We sat there for a long time, 2 women connected by DNA and trauma, trying to figure out what to say to each other. She told me about struggling to finish high school while transitioning between foster homes, about working 3 part-time jobs to afford a tiny apartment, about relationships that never quite worked because she didn't know how to trust people not to leave, about depression and anxiety and therapy she couldn't always afford. I told her about Margaret and William, about being raised with love and stability, about learning to run restaurants and being left an inheritance, about the guilt I sometimes felt for being the lucky one. You deserved it too, she said fiercely. You deserved exactly what I deserved. We both did. It's not your fault you got lucky, and I didn't. But it felt like my fault somehow. Like I'd won a lottery ticket while she'd starved, and the only reason was pure chance. We exchanged phone numbers. She said maybe we could get dinner sometime if I wanted. I said yes. After she left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, thinking about how different our lives had been. She'd been dealt the same terrible hand I had, but she'd never drawn the card that said adopted by people who love you unconditionally. Pure luck. That's all that separated my life from hers. I drove home feeling angry and sad and grateful all at once. Angry at my biological parents for creating multiple damaged people. Sad for my sister. I'd started thinking of her that way immediately, who'd never gotten the chance I'd gotten. Grateful for my mom and dad, who'd given me everything I needed to become someone strong enough to fight back. The restaurants kept me busy for the next few weeks. We had a health inspection at the downtown location, a broken freezer at the Northside place, and 2 longtime employees retiring from the original restaurant that Dad's grandfather had started back in the 1950s. I threw myself into work because it was easier than sitting at home thinking about everything that had happened. Then, 3 weeks after the court ruling, my biological parents showed up at the main restaurant. I was in my office going over supply orders when Denise, the floor manager, knocked on my door. There's a couple here asking for you, she said. They say they're family. I told them you weren't available, but they won't leave. I knew immediately who it was. I went downstairs and found them sitting at a booth near the back, looking somehow even more worn down than they had in court. The restaurant was mostly empty. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner. You need to leave, I said, not sitting down. There's a restraining order. You're not supposed to be here. Please, my biological mother said. Just give us 5 minutes. I'm calling the police. I pulled out my phone. We're homeless, my biological father said. The court costs bankrupted us. We lost our apartment. We have nowhere to go. I looked at them for a long moment. They looked terrible. Clothes wrinkled, probably slept in. My biological mother's hair needed washing. My biological father had a bruise on his cheek I didn't want to know about. They looked exactly like what they were. People who'd hit rock bottom. Not my problem, I said. We're your parents, my biological mother said. And she actually had the audacity to sound wounded. No, I said very clearly. Margaret and William were my parents. You're the people who threw me away when I was 7 years old and then tried to steal the inheritance they left me. You're strangers who happen to share my DNA. We made mistakes, my biological father said. We were young and stupid and poor, and we made terrible decisions. But we're still your family. I laughed. Couldn't help it. You abandoned 2 children. You lied in court. You tried to manipulate and exploit me. And when that didn't work, you violated a restraining order because you thought showing up looking pathetic would make me give you money. You're not family. You're exactly what the judge said you were. People who view children as resources to be discarded or exploited depending on what's convenient. We're desperate, my biological mother said. And now she was crying again. Real tears this time. I thought, fear tears. You could get a job, I said, like normal people do when they need money. Just a small loan, my biological father tried. Enough to get back on our feet. We'll pay you back. Get out of my restaurant, I said. Right now. Or I'm calling the police and you'll both be arrested for violating a court order. They left. Slowly, pathetically, but they left. I stood there watching them go, and I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little bit. They'd made their choices. Every single one of them. They'd abandoned 2 children, traumatized them permanently, then tried to cash in when one of those children ended up inheriting something valuable. They'd created their own misery, and I had zero obligation to fix it. Denise came over after they were gone. You okay? Yeah, I said. I'm fine. That night, I called Mr. Patterson and told him what happened. He said he'd file criminal charges for violating the restraining order in the morning. I said good. Then I called my sister. I'd started calling her that in my head, even though we'd only met once, and told her what happened. She was quiet for a minute. Do you feel bad? She asked finally. No, I said. Should I? I don't know. I think I would. They didn't feel bad when they left you in a supermarket parking lot, I said. They didn't feel bad when they left me in a park. They didn't feel bad when they tried to steal my inheritance. Why should I feel bad for protecting myself? She didn't have an answer for that. The criminal case moved fast. My biological parents had violated a clear court order. There were witnesses, and they didn't have money for a decent lawyer. The public defender assigned to them tried to argue that they'd been desperate and homeless, that they deserved mercy. The judge who'd issued the restraining order in the first place was the one who heard the case. He was not sympathetic. 6 months in county jail. Both of them. Plus, the restraining order was automatically extended for another 10 years after their release. I sat in the courtroom and watched them get sentenced and felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just a neutral emptiness where they existed in my mental space. Mr. Patterson asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I said no. They weren't worth any more of my words. After they were taken away, I went to visit my parents' graves. I did that sometimes when I needed to feel close to them. I told them about the court case, about the restraining order violation, about the jail sentence. I told them I'd protected what they built, that I'd made sure the people who tried to destroy what we had faced real consequences. Then I called my sister and asked if she wanted to have dinner. She said yes. We met at a casual place downtown, nothing fancy. She was nervous, I could tell. Kept fiddling with her napkin, ordering then changing her order, apologizing for apologizing. I recognized the behavior. It was what people did when they'd spent their whole lives believing they didn't deserve to take up space. I have a proposition for you, I said after we'd ordered. I want to offer you a job. She looked confused. Doing what? Administrative work at the restaurants. Scheduling, payroll processing, vendor communications. Nothing you can't learn. I'll train you myself. Why? She asked, and she looked genuinely baffled. Because you're my sister, I said. Because we both got screwed over by the same people, but I got lucky and you didn't. Because I have resources and stability and you don't, and that's not fair. Because my parents taught me that family helps family, and you're more my family than those 2 people sitting in jail right now. She started crying. Not sad crying, something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. You don't have to decide now, I said. Think about it. I don't need to think about it, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. She started working 2 weeks later. I set her up with a decent salary, $45,000 a year plus full benefits, health insurance that actually covered mental health treatment, paid time off, and a retirement plan with employer matching. All the things I'd want if I were starting over. All the things she'd never had in any of the countless low-wage jobs she'd cycled through. The first week, she came in every day looking terrified she'd mess something up and get fired. I recognized that fear. It was the fear of someone who'd never had security, who was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd felt it too in the early years with Margaret and William, even though they'd given me no reason to doubt their commitment. "You're doing great," I told her on Friday of that first week. "Seriously, you've picked this up faster than the last 2 people I trained." "Really?" she asked, and she looked so genuinely surprised it broke my heart a little. "Really," I confirmed. "You're detail-oriented and you actually read the instructions instead of just guessing. That puts you ahead of 90% of people." She relaxed incrementally after that. Not all at once, but week by week, month by month. I watched her settle into the idea that this job was real, that I wasn't going to change my mind about wanting her around, that stability was something she was allowed to have. She was quick to learn and detail-oriented in a way that actually reminded me of myself. Denise said she was great with the staff, patient and clear when explaining things. Employees who'd been skeptical about nepotism because they assumed we were close warmed up to her when they realized she genuinely pulled her weight and treated everyone with respect. Slowly, carefully, we started building something that felt like a relationship. We'd get lunch once a week, nothing intense, just checking in. She told me about her years in foster care, the good families who genuinely tried but weren't equipped to handle her trauma, the bad families who saw foster kids as free labor or government checks, the group homes where you learn to sleep light and protect your belongings. I told her about my childhood with my parents. Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, learning to cook, feeling safe. "You were so lucky," she'd say sometimes. And I'd agree, because I was. We'd both been dealt the same awful hand at the beginning, but the cards that came after had been wildly different. 6 months after she started working, she told me she'd been seeing a therapist. That she'd been in therapy on and off for years, but never consistently because she couldn't afford it, or because she'd move and have to find someone new, or because she'd lose her job and lose her insurance. "That's great," I said. "Are they helping?" "Yeah," she said. She specializes in childhood trauma and attachment issues. "We're working through a lot of stuff about abandonment and trust." She paused. I told her about you, about all of this. The job, the relationship, everything. What did she say? She said I should let myself be happy, that I keep waiting for you to leave, and that's normal given my history, but that I need to work on accepting that some people actually do stick around. I felt the weight of that responsibility, being someone's proof that not everyone leaves. But I also felt grateful that I was in a position to be that person for her. I quietly adjusted her health insurance to cover better mental health benefits, then did the same for all employees across all 7 restaurants. My dad had always said that good employers take care of their people. I was trying to live up to that. The restaurants were doing well. I didn't expand them or franchise them or do any of the aggressive business stuff consultants kept suggesting. My parents had built something sustainable and good, and I wanted to keep it that way. Quality food, fair prices, employees who stayed for years because they were treated with dignity. That was the legacy I was protecting. My biological parents finished their jail sentence. I found out through Mr. Patterson, who kept me updated because he said I had a right to know. They moved to a different state immediately after release. I didn't ask where. Didn't care. The restraining order was still active and they'd already proven they understood the consequences of violating it. I thought I'd feel something when I heard they were out. Relief, anxiety, something. But I felt nothing. They were just 2 people who used to be relevant to my life and weren't anymore. Like old classmates I'd forgotten about. My sister asked me once if I ever wondered what my life would have been like if my biological parents had kept me. I said no. There was no point in wondering. They'd made their choice, and that choice had led me to Mom and Dad, who'd given me everything I needed to become who I was. In a weird way, my biological parents' worst decision had been the best thing that ever happened to me. "Do you think they regret it?" she asked. "I think they regret getting caught," I said. "I don't think they regret abandoning us." She was quiet for a while. Then, I used to fantasize that they'd come back for me, that they'd show up at whatever foster home I was in and say it had all been a terrible mistake. I'd imagine them crying and apologizing and begging me to come home. "Did you want that?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe when I was little. Now, I'm just glad I know the truth. They're not good people. They never were. And that's not my fault or yours." 2 years after the original lawsuit, I got a letter from the State Corrections Department. My biological father had died in prison from complications related to heart disease. My biological mother had been released to a halfway house months earlier due to her own declining health. She died 3 weeks after him. No funeral arrangements for either. No one had claimed the bodies. When I told my sister, She asked if I wanted to do anything. I said no. She nodded, and we moved on to talking about Denise's daughter graduating high school and a new supplier we were considering. Normal, everyday life things. I thought about visiting their graves, but decided against it. I didn't need closure from them. I'd already gotten that in the courtroom 2 years earlier, when the judge dismissed their lawsuit and issued the restraining order. That was my closure. Everything after was just waiting for them to exit the story permanently, which they finally had. A few weeks later, my sister told me she'd started dating someone, a guy she'd met at her therapist's office. He was seeing a different therapist. Not a weird power dynamic situation. She was nervous telling me, like she needed permission to be happy. The restaurants hit their best year financially that fall. Nothing dramatic, just steady growth and consistent quality. Revenue was up 12% across all locations. Employee retention was at an all-time high, and customer satisfaction scores were strong. I hired 3 new managers, promoted Denise to regional supervisor, with a significant raise and her own benefits package upgrade, and started a small scholarship fund for employees' kids who wanted to go to college. My parents had done something similar informally, helping out when they could, slipping cash into cards for graduation or quietly paying application fees. I wanted to make it official, structured, something that would outlast me. My sister suggested we expand the scholarship to include foster kids in the community, kids who didn't have parents to help them figure out college applications or FAFSA forms or any of that bureaucratic nightmare. Kids like she'd been. I thought that was perfect. We set it up through a local nonprofit that worked with foster youth, established clear criteria, minimum 2.5 GPA, demonstrated financial need, personal essay about goals and challenges, and funded it for the next 5 years up front, $50,000. It felt like a lot, and also like not nearly enough given the scale of the problem. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl named Tamara, who'd been in foster care since she was 9. She wanted to study social work so she could help kids like herself. Her essay made me cry. She wrote about how nobody had ever believed she could go to college, how guidance counselors had steered her toward fast food jobs and told her to be realistic about her options, how she'd taken extra shifts at her part-time job to save money for applications and still couldn't afford to apply to more than 2 schools. When we met her to present the scholarship, $5,000 per year for 4 years, contingent on maintaining enrollment and decent grades, she cried and hugged both of us. My sister cried too. I almost did, but managed to hold it together until we got back to the car. Mom and Dad would love this, I told my sister as I sat in the parking lot trying to compose myself. Tell me about them, she said. Really tell me. I want to know what good parents look like. So I did. I told her about how Dad would wake up at 4 in the morning to prep the kitchens himself, even though he could afford to hire people to do it, because he said you couldn't ask employees to care about quality if you didn't demonstrate it yourself first. About how Mom learned to make hot chocolate exactly the way I liked it, extra marshmallows, a dash of cinnamon, and kept the ingredients stocked at every single restaurant location, so I'd always have it available when I came in for visits. About how they came to every school event, every birthday, every moment that mattered. About parent-teacher conferences where they'd ask detailed questions about my progress and thank my teachers for their work. About teaching me to drive and being patient when I accidentally curbed the wheels. About the time I had my heart broken at 16, and Dad took me to the original restaurant location at midnight and taught me how to make bread from scratch, while we talked about how some people aren't capable of seeing other people's value. They sound amazing, my sister said, and her voice was thick with something that might have been grief for parents she'd never had. They were, I said. They really were. And the thing is, they would have loved you too. If they'd known you existed, they would have moved heaven and earth to bring you into our family. That's the kind of people they were. She wiped her eyes. I like thinking about that. The alternate universe where maybe I got adopted by them too. You're part of the family now, I said. Maybe it took longer than it should have, but you're here. We sat in that parking lot for another 20 minutes, talking about hypothetical Thanksgivings where we'd both been at the table, where she'd learned to make pot roast alongside me, where she'd grown up secure and loved. It was bittersweet, imagining what should have been, but it also felt good to acknowledge the loss, to name what we'd both missed out on because of 2 people's selfishness. I thought about my biological parents sometimes, but only in the abstract way you think about historical events. Things that happened a long time ago to a version of yourself you barely recognized. They were part of my story, but they didn't define it. Mom and Dad defined it. The choice I made to fight back defined it. The relationship I'd built with my sister defined it. That night, I went home to the house my parents had left me. It was too big for just me, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Too many memories embedded in the walls. I made tea in Mom's favorite mug and sat in Dad's chair on the back porch. The thing about being abandoned is that it teaches you people are temporary, that love is conditional, that at any moment, the people you count on can decide you're not worth the effort. My biological parents had taught me that lesson twice. Once when they left me, once when they tried to exploit me. But Mom and Dad had taught me something different. They'd taught me that real love doesn't give up, that family is about choice and commitment, not biology. That even when someone comes into your life damaged and scared, you can build something beautiful if you're willing to put in the work. I'd carried both lessons with me. The knowledge that people could hurt you, and the knowledge that people could also save you. And somewhere in the tension between those two truths, I'd figured out how to protect myself while still remaining open to connection. My sister texted me a photo. Her boyfriend had made her dinner, apparently. It looked terrible. He'd somehow burned pasta, which seemed impossible. But she was laughing in the selfie they'd taken together. She looked younger than 35 in that photo. She looked like someone who'd finally stopped waiting for the next disaster. I texted back, "Marry him if he can make you laugh like that." She sent back a string of laughing emojis and way too early for that talk. But I meant it. She deserved someone who made her happy. She deserved stability and joy and all the things she'd been denied in childhood. And if I could help make that possible by giving her a job and health insurance and a place in my life, then I was going to do it. Because that's what family did. Real family. Chosen family. The kind that mattered. I finished my tea and went inside. Tomorrow, I had meetings about the holiday menu, interviews for 2 open positions, and a contractor coming to look at some plumbing issues at the West Side location. Normal business owner stuff. The life my parents had prepared me for. Sometimes I still talk to them. Not in a weird way, just occasional updates to their memory. "We hit revenue targets this quarter," I'd tell the heir while going over the books. "Denise's daughter got into nursing school. Your scholarship fund helped 3 kids this year." I like to think they heard me somehow. That they knew I was taking care of what they'd built. That I was okay. Because I was okay. Finally, genuinely okay. Not despite what my biological parents had done, but because I'd refused to let their actions define my life. They'd tried to take everything from me twice. And both times I'd fought back. I'd won. And winning didn't mean they suffered, though they had. It meant I got to keep living a life they couldn't touch anymore. It meant building something good with my sister out of the ashes of what they'd destroyed. It meant honoring my real parents' memory by being exactly the kind of person they'd raised me to be. Strong, fair, uncompromising when it mattered. A few weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Patterson. He'd received a letter from my biological mother's attorney. She was dying. Cancer. 3 months, maybe 6. She wanted to see me. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That I'd pass along the message," he said. "What you do with it is entirely your decision." I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "No," I said. "You're sure?" he asked. This would be the last chance. "I'm sure," I said. She had 29 years to be my mother. She chose not to be. I don't owe her a deathbed reconciliation. "I'll let them know," he said. And he didn't try to convince me otherwise. That's why I liked Mr. Patterson. He understood that not every story needed a neat, forgiving ending. When I told my sister, she was quiet for a minute. "I think I might go," she said finally. "Not for her, for me, to see if there's anything I need to say." "That's different," I said. "Your closure isn't my closure." She went. She told me about it later. Our biological mother had looked small and sick, nothing like the woman from the courtroom. She'd cried and said she was sorry, that she'd made terrible mistakes, that she wished she could go back and change everything. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told her I forgave her for me, not for her," my sister said. "That I needed to let go of the anger because it was hurting me more than it was hurting her. But that forgiveness didn't mean I wanted a relationship, that she was still a stranger who'd hurt me, and that wasn't going to change." How did she react? She cried more, asked if she could hug me. I said no. "Good," I said. My sister looked at me carefully. "Do you think I'm weak for going?" "No," I said immediately. "I think you did what you needed to do. That's not weakness." "Do you think you'll regret not going?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. I already said everything I needed to say to her, in the courtroom, in my head, to Dad's grave. I'm done. And I was. Completely, totally done. My biological mother died 6 weeks later. I got a notification letter. I didn't go to the funeral. My sister did. She said there were maybe 8 people there. mostly distant relatives who barely knew her. No one cried except one aunt who apparently cried at every funeral regardless of who died. It was sad, my sister told me, not in a tragic way, just empty, like her whole life had been wasted. It was wasted, I said. She had opportunities to build something real. She chose not to. After that, we didn't talk about them anymore. Our biological parents became something we'd both moved past, individually and together. They'd shaped us, sure. You can't be abandoned twice and not carry some scars. But they didn't define us. We'd both built lives that were ours, lives they had no claim to. The restaurants expanded to 9 locations over the next 3 years. Not because I was chasing growth, but because opportunities came up in neighborhoods where we could make a real difference. Places where good affordable food and steady employment were needed. I named the 8th location after my mom, the 9th one after my dad. My sister eventually married the guy who'd burned the pasta. They had a small wedding at the original restaurant location. I was her maid of honor. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, my sister said, "I give myself away because I belong to myself." Everyone cried. It was perfect. She got pregnant 2 years later, a little girl. They asked me to be the godmother. When I held the baby for the first time, tiny and perfect and already loved, I thought about how different this child's life would be. She'd never know what it felt like to be abandoned. She'd never wonder if she was worth keeping. She'd grow up secure and safe and wanted. "She's beautiful," I told my sister. "She looks like you," my sister said, which was ridiculous because we weren't genetically related. But I understood what she meant. Family resemblance wasn't always about biology. The baby grabbed my finger with her tiny hand and held on tight. I made her a silent promise right there. I'd always be her safe place, her constant, the person who showed up no matter what. Because that's what my parents had been for me, and that's what I would be for her. Life kept happening. The normal, beautiful, sometimes difficult flow of it. Restaurants opened and closed. Employees came and went. Some years were more profitable than others. My sister and I navigated it all together. Business partners and family and friends all mixed into one complicated, wonderful relationship. I visited my parents' graves less frequently as time went on. Not because I loved them less, but because I didn't need to go there to feel close to them anymore. They were in everything I did. Every fair business decision, every employee I treated with dignity, every time I chose compassion over cruelty. They'd built that into me, and it wasn't going anywhere. Sometimes people asked about my family. I'd say I was raised by amazing parents who taught me everything important. If they asked if I had siblings, I'd say yes, one sister. If they asked about my biological parents, I'd say they weren't in my life and leave it at that. Most people didn't push. The ones who did, who wanted the dramatic story, I'd give them the shortest version possible. They gave me up when I was 7. I was adopted by better people. End of story. Usually they'd take the hint and change the subject, because it was the end of the story. Or at least, the end of their story in my life. My story kept going. It kept being interesting and full and meaningful. And they were barely a footnote. On what would have been my mom's 70th birthday, I closed all 9 restaurants for the day and threw a huge party for all the employees and their families. We served all her favorite recipes. We told stories about her. We laughed and ate too much and celebrated a woman who deserved celebrating. My sister gave a toast. She said she'd never met my mom, but she knew her through me. Through the way I ran the business, the way I treated people, the way I'd built something lasting out of love and respect. "That's the legacy of Margaret," my sister said, raising her glass. "She raised someone who changed my life. She raised someone who gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one." I cried. Big, ugly, grateful tears, because my sister was right. Mom and Dad's legacy wasn't just the restaurants or the money. It was the person they'd raised me to be. Someone who fought for what mattered. Someone who protected the people they loved. Someone who understood that family was about choice and commitment and showing up. That night, after everyone left and the restaurants were dark and quiet, I sat in the original location where it had all started, where Dad's grandfather had first opened the doors in 1953, where my parents had worked side by side for 30 years, where they'd brought me as a scared 7-year-old who didn't trust anyone. I thought about my biological parents one last time, really let myself think about them, about what they'd done, about the pain they'd caused. And then I consciously decided to be done, to close that chapter permanently. They'd lost because they'd thrown away 2 daughters who went on to build beautiful lives without them. I'd won. My sister had won. We'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to us and transformed it into something that made us stronger. I locked up the restaurant and drove home. My sister had texted, "Dinner tomorrow? I'm cooking." I texted back, "Yes, I'll bring wine." Simple, normal, perfect. My parents would be proud.